Hey guys, welcome back to Chasing Giants TV. Out here on my property today, checking some trees and such, kind of babying them along. Some of the first year tree planting, and also some that were planted last year, so second year planting. But if you've been following along on the podcast, you've heard me talk about the 40 acres that I acquired a couple years ago. And I'm right pretty much in the middle of that 40 at the moment. It's a odd shaped piece. It follows a creek. If I turn my camera, you see the willow trees and such there behind me. Those willow trees are growing along that creek. What I wanted to do in the project, this first project I'm going to show you, if you look behind me, you can see that timber. Well, I've owned that timber for a long time, probably 25 years or so. It's kind of separate from my farm, or it had been, and just kind of isolated out there by itself, but had a chance to buy it all those years ago, real reasonable, so I did that. Filmed some videos there. If you've seen, you ever see my TSI video where I went in and just annihilated the woods, and I've talked about how there was hardly any deer using it before, but after I did that aggressive TSI, they started using it heavy, and that next spring I found 8 shed antlers where I'd never found one before. So the deer started utilizing that timber behind me there right after we did that TSI all those years ago. Now, if I turn completely around, back down the creek, you can see that other timber right there behind me. And that is part of this 40 that I just acquired a couple years back. And it touches my main farm, the 120 that I originally had and I've been working on for all these years. So what I wanted to do with this first project I'm going to show you is connect that part of the farm, that timber you can see way back over my shoulder, which is more than a quarter mile from where I'm at now. It's probably close to a half a mile from that timber to the other one behind me. And I wanted to connect them, and that creek connects them. That creek runs through both those timbers, but here where I'm at the moment, it was farmed right down to that. That creek had been cleared of all the trees, and it just farmed right up to both sides of it. And what I wanted to do was create a travel corridor between these timbers that the deer would utilize in daylight. Now, I'm sure they follow that creek at night a lot, and occasionally does and young bucks probably do some during the day, but I want to create a travel corridor that mature bucks will eventually use to traverse this property, because from one end of my property, the other end of that woods behind me, to the other end of my property is 1.6 miles long. So I own 1.6 miles of creek, and I own every tree on both sides of that creek for 1.6 miles. Where the woods ends behind me, the next property, the creek just becomes a drainage ditch. So it's wide open for at least a half a mile once you get out of that timber there behind me. So very isolated property. The deer will travel some in daylight, the mature bucks especially in daylight only on this property. They don't get up on this property and move, across this wide open country to the next property, but they will move within the cover. So what I've tried to do here is create a travel corridor where they're very likely to move. And I'm going to get into that and show you some of the different things I've done. So if I turn around, you can see this mowed lane. That was my property line. I basically owned here on this side of that mowed lane. And then just recently, I bought this ag field. So I've kind of added to the farm. I haven't added to the deer cover at all, but acquired a little more ag ground that sits around me. So let's get back into that travel corridor that's on the one side of this mowed lane and show you what I've done here. So the first thing I did was right along this mowed lane, I planted I planted some Norway spruce, and in some areas there's only 2 rows, but where it's a little bit wider, there's maybe 3 or 4 rows. But I'll show you some of those Norway spruce. So that's what you're going to see here at first. So the purpose of the Norways was, you know, as evergreens, they're going to provide a little bit of screening as well as a wind block there along that lane from this cover behind me. That creek is, I'm going to guess most of the deer travel is going to be right along that creek, right next to those willows and such. So after the Norway spruce, I planted some persimmons. I'm going to show you in a minute, but I just caught myself here real quick. Another thing I did last fall was I came in here with a bunch of acorns, and I threw them acorns out. I drove along the lane that I just showed you, and I just, as far as I could sling them, probably, I'm talking 60, 70, 80 pounds of acorns, I just slung out into this area for some natural regeneration of oaks. And as I walked by here, there's two young oaks, two different species growing right here at my feet. I wasn't expecting that. That's why it kind of threw me for a loop for a second. But here's a little shingle oak. And then right close to it is an English oak. So amongst these weeds and such, you can see these volunteer oaks, and actually in places there's quite a few of them. But get down here closer to the creek. A couple things I want you to see. One, notice all those wildflowers and forbs growing out there. I came in here, down here towards the, closer to the creek, away from basically everywhere where the, except where the Norway spruce were. I came in here and I just broadcast some forb seeds and some shorter native worm seeds and native grasses. And those have done really well, as you can see by all these yellow flowers. Now at different times of the year, there'll be other of those forbs blooming. I also planted basically a row of these persimmon trees along this entire creek, and these are all grafted female persimmons. I thought that putting a little bit of a food source in here in this travel corridor will really help encourage the deer traffic right down here along the creek where I want them anyway. And in full disclosure, I got a stand down here towards the end of where this travel corridor is going to be. But you can see some of those persimmon trees in tubes behind me. And they're doing really well. These are all grafted female persimmons. Just growing fantastic. You can see all the new growth on this tree. This tree was planted last spring, so this would be its second year. And they have really exploded. And like I said in some of my other videos, I fertilize them with a fertilizer that's high in nitrogen. I mix urea with triple 15 on a 50-50 ratio and fertilize these trees this spring, and I've never had new growth on trees like I've had this year. The other thing I do is I spray around each one of those tubes so that tree can get established without competition. Now we're going to go a little bit farther down towards the creek. You see these oak trees with the white tubes around them? I put 2 rows of them right along these willows that are on the creek. And 2 reasons. One, I didn't want this place to get overtaken with scrub trees, you know, like locusts and things like that. I wanted to get some good oaks established. So I started with some burlap trees, had Gingrich Tree Farm come in. And I think there's over 100 trees planted along this creek here. In 2 rows, staggered rows. They're about 50 feet apart, so plenty of room for them to grow. You know, the willows, I'm sure the bucks will just tear them willows up rubbing. I didn't really do this to create bedding cover, although I'm sure there's going to be deer bed in it as it gets growed up more. But just to create that travel corridor and also some diversity. This is one of my favorite habitat projects on the whole farm. And 2 years ago, this was being farmed. 2 years ago, there was a wheat crop right here where I'm standing. And last year was when I started the tree planting projects and got it started. But it just looks fantastic. I'm really pleased with how it's coming along, especially this year. Last year we had a dry spell and lost some of those Norway spruce, but all the oaks survived, and I think all but 2 of the persimmons survived. And there's probably, I'm going to guess, about between 30 and 40 persimmons scattered out along this strip as well. But this is just going to become a fantastic travel corridor that the deer won't be afraid to use in daylight hours, and that's the big key. I want them to be able to travel the whole length, this whole 1 6/10 in daylight, because if they've got all that cover to travel in, they're way less likely to, go to somebody else's property in the neighborhood. And the goal here is to keep those deer on this property as many daylight hours as possible, so I can move them on to older age classes. So I'm going to finish up this video in another location. There's another project I did on this 40 that I think you'll find very interesting as well. So now I'm down here at the very end of that travel corridor, and it really narrows down. You're going to be able to see the persimmon trees. You can see that oak back there that we planted. But I'm here at the very end of that travel corridor. And if I turn around, it ends up right at one of my fruit orchards. Clover plot, fruit orchard, right at that timber. So this is all connected. Let me turn around a little bit more, and you can see a post that I've set there for a trail camera. Don't know if you can see, there's a tower I put up here that's going to have a 360 blind on it. You can see right there overlooking this clover plot right at the end of that travel corridor. Connects right to the woods behind me. The creek is right there inside those trees. So I've just created a situation where the deer can travel this creek, stay in the cover, have food sources at key locations that I can take advantage of with stands and blinds. Keep those deer on this property for 1 6/10, and the property just gets better and better. Guys, I'm telling you, I've been all over the country on whitetail properties, and I don't know that I've ever seen a property better than this one, the way it lays out and such. And I'll be the first to tell you, it was not by design, at least to start with. It was by accident. This farm started as my grandparents' farm many years ago. My mom was actually born on this farm, and just after my grandparents passed away, I bought it. Kind of fell into my lap. Bought it off the estate, added acreage to it a little bit at a time over the years as I could afford it. Did projects as I could afford them. Some of those projects were a total disaster. I learned more the hard way by doing things wrong than I ever did by getting it right the first time. But the one thing I did was try not to repeat my mistakes and not make the same mistake twice. But today it's come together, and it just keeps getting better and better and better. And I would put it up against any other deer hunting property in North America, acre for acre. I'm sure there may be some properties that sit right next to giant no hunting sanctuaries where guys are consistently killing giants, but I don't have that here. I'm sitting out in an oasis of ag fields, and I got some really good deer coming on. I've killed 2 200s on this farm, and I expect that I'll probably kill at least another one. Who knows, maybe another 2 or 3, but maybe this season, maybe not. I have no idea. But just really happy with the way this is all tied together, and the way that the deer are utilizing it. And more than anything, it's how I can keep these bucks at home and keep them alive. That's the big challenge on a lot of properties. There's probably a lot of properties that have whitetail habitat just as good as this one, if not better, but they don't lay out in such a way that you can really keep those deer alive, especially the young bucks or the bucks when they get 2 or 3 years old start wandering. It's really hard to keep them alive, but just fell into my lap, and I made the most of it. But got one more thing to show you before we end this video. So now I'm down at that timber that I was showing you in the previous video clip, and down at the end of that travel corridor I'd created. And I don't know if you can see it, but along the edge of this timber is a strip that I planted in rye last fall. So here's exactly what I did. I came in here last summer, and I sprayed a strip about 6 foot wide along the trees. I was out from the trees probably a good 20, 30 feet. and sprayed that strip, ran just parallel with the woods. Hopefully you can see it. And then last fall I came in with a tiller and I tilled that up where I'd sprayed and killed everything. And as soon as I got done tilling it the first time, I came in with a bunch of acorns off of various oak trees, and I scattered them in that loose dirt. And then I drove right back over it with the tiller and I tilled those acorns into the ground. And when I got done with that, I came in here and spread just a little bit of rye on top of that. And the reason for that is the rye will do a couple things. First, it'll hide those little tree seedlings. And secondly, it will keep the weeds down, so those tree seedlings can get off to a good start the next spring, and they'll be hid in the rye where deer have a hard time finding them and browsing them off. The rye will keep the weeds down, especially early in the spring. Later in the summer, when conditions get drier and that the rye matures, it'll die and turn brown as it's starting to do now. And then it just leaves a bunch of these little trees in great shape to really take off. I'm going to turn my camera and show you some of these young trees from the seed that I planted. So as you can see now, I got a bunch of young oaks of various species coming up along this edge. I'm just going to let this edge go back to natural regeneration now with these young oaks started in there. There's plenty of oaks in this woods as well, so I'm sure the squirrels have buried some acorns out here on this edge, probably some hickory nuts as well, and walnuts. So there's just going to be about, I'm going to guess, 25 feet total of area next to this woods that had been mowed before I bought it, right up to the trees, but now it's going to regenerate and it's going to create kind of a screen, a wind block, as the wind comes across the wide open prairie and hits this timber. Great food, with the acorns that are going to be produced from these oaks in future years, the browse that's going to be there real soon. So just another project on that 40 that, if you listen to the podcast at all, I've been excited about that 40 since I got it and some of the projects I got going on. But I think in 5 years, these projects I showed you today will be to the point where it's just going to be fantastic deer cover. The deer are going to be utilizing them. Those persimmon trees and some of the oak trees will be producing acorns. The apple trees will be producing, and just going to really encourage those deer to stay home, and we see what we can do to grow some more giants.